right, I think we're all here. Are you guys okay to start? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us today for the Finance and Appropriation Committee meeting. Appreciate it. So if we could convene the meeting, I'll ask our treasurer to call the roll, please.
Ms. Zaranen?
Here.
Mr. Hemphill?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Board Member Gibbs?
Here.
Board Member Peretti?
Here.
Chairman Hudson?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you very much. So our first order of business will be to review the minutes from our prior meeting, February 12th. We had our budget presentation, and I really don't think the minutes do justice to, I know we had a pretty significant presentation and the start of one of several of those, but does anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, so our next order of business, the bond financing overview. I'll turn it over to our treasurer. Mr.
Okay.
Warwick.
Thank you very much. I just want to let the committee know this afternoon about a work that we're doing on yet another bond refinancing. Back in February, we culminated the review of underwriters. We did a request for qualifications on underwriters, went through that process to rebuild our team, if you will. We established a pool of underwriters from which we can select one or more of them to work on a financing. That pool had dwindled down to about 3 firms, which I didn't think was sufficient, and we now have a pool of 8 firms after going through this process. That was approved, I believe, in February. Then at the first meeting in March, we approved several resolutions, 3 resolutions to be exact. 2 of the resolutions have to do with some bonds we issued back in 2009. 16.4 million roughly and 35.7 million roughly that are still eligible to be refinanced. Those we would do on a tax-exempt basis. And then another resolution for 133.4 million of bonds that were originally part of a 2003 and 2004 issue, but have been subsequently refunded once into a 2006 issue, and therefore this refunding, if we do it again, has to be on a taxable basis. These resolutions just put that authorization in place. We've selected Secret Branford Shank out of the pool to be the lead manager, and who else we put on the team depends upon the size of the issue. Those numbers are the maximum amount. It's driven strictly by interest rates. The better the rates, the more of the series of bonds become eligible. In other words, they make sense to refinance. We have certain criteria as to whether or not we would actually refund a series of bonds. Generally speaking, we need to get 3% net present value savings of the new debt service versus the old debt service. Some are more, some are less. The original run shows, I think, that I've got it right here, the savings right now on a nominal basis run anywhere from about 1.8 million to 4.2 million. And the present value savings anywhere from 3.3 to 3.2 of the debt service. So we're on the bubble right now. We also agreed when we met with our,
Stan, what do you mean by on the bubble?
not enough to proceed.
Okay.
Those seem like large numbers, but we're on it's just marginally whether it's worth the time and effort, quite frankly. The last bond issue, refunding issue that we did in December, we had 7.4 million in nominal savings, about 6.3 million in net present value savings, and that was on 148 million of debt issued. So again, this might be worthwhile doing, but we're watching it. What we want to do is put ourselves in the position to move to the market quickly. That's why we have the board resolution in place. We'll get a preliminary official statement in place. Like I said, we identified a lead manager so that they're running numbers and can be in tune with us and the market We will recontact the rating agencies. We have some decisions to make there. Do we do a phone call? Do we go visit? Is this a time to really push hard for an upgrade? Those kind of issues have to be addressed. But I want to get all of that done, and again, be prepared to move into the market rather than to wait and have our advisor come to us and say, hey, we need to go to the market tomorrow, and I've got 4 weeks of paperwork to do. I don't want that to happen. I want us to be prepared. We'll have a window of probably 3 to 4 months before some of this information goes stale on us. We might have to re-up on the board resolution, revisit the rating agency. We get close to a fiscal year end, and oftentimes the market wants to wait to see what the final results are. So we're looking at March, April, May as a time period that we can actually be sitting in the ready to do a refunding. So I just want to let you know that that's in the works and kind of here on the shelf, ready to go.
Yes,
What is your current rating?
AA plus, AA plus,
What's the highest?
AAA.
So there's
The city
we can
city
go up,
and
but
county,
not-
I believe, are AAA.
So what are we doing? What are we doing with the proceeds? Are we paying off existing debt?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like refinancing your home mortgage.
Just the savings of the life.
Yes,
And are the savings numbers that you, are those net of the fees?
yes.
Will this improve our rating?
Not necessarily. Ratings are more driven by the absolute dollar amount of debt that's outstanding, so that's the real debt burden. On an annual basis, when you spread out $7 million over 10 to 15 years, annually, it's not a large number that would lower the debt burden for our tax base since it's so large. This is, to me, these refundings are squeezing what we can. And because we do it on a net basis, net of fees, we're squeezing out the last, and I know this is going to sound like, millions of dollars, they're big numbers to folks, but for the size and scope of the debt that we have, we're squeezing out the last 2, 3, 4, 5 million that we can out of that debt service. Every million, I know that sounds funny, but every million counts, but when you look on an annual basis, like the millage impact, not noticeable. But still, I want to squeeze that, if I can get another 5, 6 million out of this debt service, then why spend it? Let's go ahead and do it.
Percentage-wise, your floor is the 3.5%.
3%, 3% net present value. Yeah. And we go through, there's some modeling that's done that assesses future call features, the value of those call features, how much of that value are we getting, the relationship between where we borrow and then we have to escrow the funds, and so we're reinvesting those dollars. And so at times there's negative arbitrage, and we manage that as well. It's somewhat of a black box at times, but rest assured, we looked at every single maturity individually, not just the deal in the aggregate. So we've even thought about setting different net present value thresholds for different maturities because of how far out the yield curve they are, how much time to that call, et cetera.
And I think to that point, or to just the gap that I'd like to work on is, we did these resolutions at the board meeting, and when we were reviewing them, this is I should ask a few more questions, but I'm wondering if we should have a policy or something, so it's kind of the resolution refers to sort of the criteria.
Mhm.
So like that 3% floor is tied to a policy, just like you would with an investment policy. So, so then it's so when the board does the resolution and they're on the shelf and ready to go, we know that they're on the shelf subject to those guardrails. And then, it's based on the due diligence that your office would conduct.
That'd be an interesting question to pose to Neola. We're up to discuss the 6000 series, which is the finance policy series. And I have to admit, I've not muddled through all
We
of them to
gave, we
see
gave you
if
a little
there's
reprieve on tonight,
I
so.
did, yes. I don't know if there's a debt policy template.
Yeah.
But
That's what
I'm sure that there are entities out there that have a debt policy.
If we could, I'd feel more comfortable, and I think that would be a way, we could work on that as a committee, but just like having an investment policy, then the committee could recommend that to the board, we enact that policy, and then it provides the treasurer with flexibility, but also we know we've got the guardrails to the deal.
Do you guys have a summary of your capital debt structure? Like, this is so much, the aggregate is X, but this much is bonds, this much is, mortgages, this much is, other, and the timelines of when they come offline or when their maturities are and how they're performing, things of that nature. Do you have any summary that gives us a larger snapshot? The reason I'm asking is because it's a way to maybe better understand how it's tied to your assets in terms of your buildings and other things, and the strategy long-term of maybe how to make some recommendations to the board about usage of capital as it relates to managing those assets. Does that make sense?
Yes. And yes, to both of your questions. Do we have a schedule? Yes. We have to have, after every issue, we get a year-by-year principal and interest schedule. And that's used for reporting to the county auditor's office, who then sets tax rates based upon the required debt service. So yes, we've got that. If you'd like to see it, we'd be glad to share it. Don't know that it's in summary nature, but I do know it's in great detail. Right, Mr. McCammon? And Mike works with that with the county auditor to make sure that they know what our debt is and then how to set the millage to collect an adequate amount of tax dollars to pay that debt service.
I think along similar lines, and I don't know what you're allowed to do as this type of entity. Do you have variable and fixed? Do you have synthetically fixed? And because that's really the way we look at it in terms of maturities and how much is fixed versus variable and how much is synthetically fixed and some of those things.
Fixed only, no variable.
And that's
Not
because
permitted.
you're not allowed to do.
Not permitted.
Okay.
There's some synthetic interest rate swaps that we are allowed to do, but the history of that with public entities is not good because of, with a swap deal, there are risks. With a plain vanilla fixed deal, there aren't. And so the risks associated with that have often not been in the favor of public entities. There, in this county, in fact, have been probably in the last, I'll say, 10 years of my recollection, a couple of deals that were well publicized. I think they were misunderstood.
Right, the mark to market.
Yeah, they were misunderstood how when you want to get out of a swap and pay the penalty because you're better off, I think it might have been misunderstood. So there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to do the synthetic. But our current debt is all fixed.
I guess I have a question about clarification and a comment. So, MJ, you were saying that, so the policy would be a debt restructuring policy similar to our investment policy, or what did you call
Well,
that
I was comparing it
policy?
to just what that restructuring policy would be.
Okay.
I was comparing it to an investment policy, so once
I'm just
once you.
getting the label, so you're
Oh,
calling it
yes.
you're calling it
a restructuring
Okay.
policy,
Thank you.
right.
That's
But I
fine.
was comparing it to
I get it.
like a board
Yeah.
enacted investment policy.
This is what these are assets
Yeah.
and these
Here's,
are.
yeah, these are the parameters,
liabilities.
this
Yeah.
is our mix, et cetera. And then once that's enacted, you let the investment team handle it. And then just similarly, so that the treasurer's office has that flexibility, but that also they're the parameters of the deal.
I guess that's what I was gonna say, is that the Fed is making, nudges that interest rates are gonna go up. So I think it is very good that we've got this market-ready position because, there'll be some period of uncertainty and then they'll start climbing. So having this, being ready and having somebody that's kind of keeping their eye on it, I guess this seems to me like the best place to be in, because we are heading into uncertainty with interest rates is what I would, as much and as little as I know about it all.
Well, that comment about the Fed is exactly, almost verbatim, what our advisor, municipal advisor, had said about why we want this 3-month window. Of course, we could also talk about the fact that once you and I are talking about this, the market bakes it in the cake.
Yes.
So there's some, once the market believes the Fed's going to move, rates move. There's an old adage that the market leads the Fed. And that's a kind of a chicken and an egg question.
Well, on
But
Monday,
regardless,
it did, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless, we are in position, we're doing the best we can with the information we have, and that means get yourself ready, watch the markets.
Wouldn't a source of information in terms of major background, maturity, interest rates be the footnotes to the financial statements associated with the audit?
I don't know how much in the audit they go into the background of our debt, other than to perhaps list our debt and talk about statutory limitations. They don't do any discussion of the environment around those. We have that discussion in closing documents for each issue that we do. Your underwriter provides, as part of that, all the preliminary analysis they did, the economic conditions under which you were then operating, and then your financing results. But not present in the audit report. Nor do we get into those types of discussion, again, other than the overall debt structure and our statutory limits in like our CAFR, our Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. We do some of that there.
So I have a question, Chair Hudson.
Yes, thank
Just,
you.
One more question in terms of a policy, and just to clarify, you said the 3% is our floor that makes sense, 3 to 5. If we were to pull a policy, are you thinking the 3% would be the threshold?
It would just memorialize that in the policy.
Because my question would be, could somebody see it differently? So if Stan goes and retires and he's over the Bermuda School District.
Thank you.
Would someone else see that differently? Would they, or does it never make sense to have a 2.75%? Or is 3 just an industry standard number where it always makes sense?
The 3% starts as an industry guideline, a generally accepted principle, if you will.
Okay.
There are reasons that we would add in, and precisely this happened in the December issue. Our overall target was 3%. But then the question was asked, to qualify as a candidate, each series, do you want 3%? Or let's say we include these series and we're at 5%. Well, here's a couple of series that don't meet the 3%. Maybe they're at 2.25 or 2.5%. They don't quite make it, but they make sense for other reasons, like we expect rates to go up and you'll never get a chance to refund those bonds again, so take your 2.25 or your 2.5 now, and so it takes the overall savings from 5 to 4.85. I made those decisions, and yes, we did put some series of bonds in there that didn't make sense standalone, but in the overall scope of things, and knowing that the risk for rising interest rates right now, in my opinion and in the opinion of lots of folks, you guys can help me out, is that the risk for higher rates, for the probability of rates rising, is greater than the probability of rates falling, given where we are and have been for the past 6-7 years. So in that regard, yes, I would not stick to that 3% maturity by maturity, but overall, I would.
As a gap.
Yes. And that would be something that we would have to look at debt policy to make sure that it was a guideline and didn't handcuff us to not make economic decisions that made economic sense.
And that was to my point as we consider it, that we don't make it so, that there's no wiggle room. Good as a guiding policy, but not a.
I would say between now
Precisely.
and maybe 10, 12 months from now, what you get is what you get. I think the market's going to go up. this honeymoon of buying down the rates, in my opinion, what I've seen, I just don't know that that's going to be sustainable going forward. So,
Great discussion.
We're ready to go, or will be.
Yeah, but maybe,
Right, Mr. McCammon?
Correct.
and maybe Board Member Capretti could ask the Neola folks
Yeah, definitely.
about that, and we'll look in
Send me a
the
note.
600
We'll see 'em.
series, and,
Yep.
but I think with that, just to look, because my concern isn't about handcuffing so much, but just making sure we have a roadmap, and, which protects everybody involved in the process. So I just think that it's important that we have that, and that this committee's reviewed it, the board's reviewed it, and then if there are variations too, it can provide for those decisions to be made too, so. Very good. Well, let's move on to the monthly financial report. Which is attached to your agenda.
Yes, I provided a copy to you both prior to the meeting and as well as
Yes.
with your agenda, and I'll move somewhat quickly, knowing full well that you'll stop me when you feel like it. And I have it if we need to bring it up on the screen, but I think since we've all got it, we're probably pretty good, so I won't worry about
Is there
the
anybody-
mechanics.
Everybody behind me has a copy that wants a copy.
There are some here at the table,
Okay.
sufficient for the audience that we have.
Okay.
The monthly report is the very last page. That's what I call the green bar report that I'll present to the board. And these are excerpts out of what my presentation will be at the March 17th board meeting. Looking at the year-to-date revenue in general, we're up 11 million over last year and 18 million under the estimate. And I've identified the major contributors there: general property tax running under, state revenue under, other locals, 3.3 million under advances in, and other financing sources are up. So we'll take a look at those in general. General property tax, continuing the discussion from last month, as you can see, we're catching up because of that delay in advances. We anticipate that the settlement will come through and will be pretty much made whole on general property tax. So we're not concerned about that 8.8 million under estimate at this point in time. On the state aid side, again, I've looked at it from a couple of angles. I look at the current monthly flow and projected that out to about 288 million, 5 million higher than our planned number of 283. But the state foundation formula shows about 282 million, which is just under our 283 million plan. So I'm going to go with the state numbers of 282 million and say that we'll be just slightly under what our plan number is on state revenues by the time we reach the end of the year, absent any surprises from that. On the other revenues, line 1.060 on the report as well as on the 5-year forecast, it's running 3.3 million under plan. And that is an aberration in our forecast. Because I got here in August, I didn't do the plan, and I didn't have any history. Looking into the detail, I see that we got this Medicaid reimbursement for several prior fiscal years, which, had we known that, we would have factored that out, and it wouldn't have been a blip. So it's just an error in how we put that estimate together. So now that we have that, and we know the detail, and I'll be around the next time we do it, I can take more of the credit and/or blame for those variances and how the estimate's put together. So we do feel that line and other revenues will run about $1.5 million under plan based upon these property tax settlements that we'll be getting in, and I think we discussed that last month as well.
Stan, to
Yes.
that point, I just have a question. Will that affect, for the rest of our budget year, how will that affect appropriations? Do we need to reconsider any of the appropriations based on that change?
In the overall scope of things, no. It'll either drive up or drive down our ending cash balance. which is sufficient at this point to end this fiscal year.
Okay.
So I would say, I would not have a budgetary and appropriation response to that kind of a variance.
Okay, thanks.
The advances, again, these are as needed, and you'll see that there's an offset to that on the expenditure line side. So we don't worry about advances because they're done on an as-needed basis, and we do not appropriate for advances. Is that correct? They show up as expenditures, but we don't, they're not in the appropriations. That's by statute, that's not a choice of ours, that's how we have to do it. And the other financing source is unchanged, it's still that county auditor reimbursement, but I just thought I keep putting it in there as a reminder that it's still the same.
Okay.
On the expenditure side, we're at $517 million, about $7 million over prior year, and $17 million under our estimate. Then, again, I identify the primary contributors, personnel, non-personnel, and advances. That's kind of funny. I identify the primary contributors. There are no other contributors other than personnel and non-personnel and advances out. I just realized writing that was like, well, that was easy to find. I think Mike found that for me. Can I blame Mike? Sure. On the personnel side, which includes salaries and wages and retirement, it continues to track as we're seeing it track this year. Under plan, we still believe will be about $5.4 million under on what we appropriated and what we estimated.
Which will offset any of the shortfalls from a revenue perspective, which we're pretty close to offsetting in themselves.
Exactly. So I'm very comfortable with this. I would rather be sitting here talking to you about running 1% under on personnel and wages, which is, 75% of our budget. I'd rather be running 1% under than 1% over. This is a line where if we run over, I may very well, Chairman Hudson, have a request that we better modify something, because you can't turn this one off,
Right.
okay? But it,
You would ascribe the positive variance associated with just vacancies in the normal course, or?
I would
Conservative.
characterize that as being conservative on the estimate. In other words, generous on the estimate to make sure that we're in. I do take a close look when we do the 5-year forecast to make sure that, try and find the right word, the cushion that's there doesn't get exacerbated out over the next 5 years. So I did, in fact, this $5.4 million, when I looked at the prior forecast and the numbers in August and September and preparing the October forecast, I pulled $6 million out, which pulled essentially about $30 million out over the forecast, because I thought that was too much. And I did that.
So that, according to this, that would bring it right to the
Well,
wire.
that left this $5.4 million in.
Okay.
So you went from.
You went from 11 to
10 or
5.
12 to about
Five.
5 or 6.
So there's your cushion, and then there's fat. You just cut the fat.
Uh,
He was
That's right.
dramatically overestimating, he's more modestly overestimating.
Well,
Johnson,
and I think,
that was your word,
That was my.
not mine?
well, and we had, the board
This is
had
a
it,
real
had the
expensive
numbers that
forecast.
Stan inherited. I think PFR, it was an outside firm that reviewed it, and they just said that it was within
projections,
a range,
not out of
a
the
projection.
expense.
Yeah. I kind of viewed it as extra conservative.
Extra conservative. Well, we have a conservative administration, which is always good. At least they didn't overspend or, some other pieces, but we want to be very accurate. So my question is, what impact will the exit of our retirees have on this number? And do we know now how many people are leaving? Will it, pension
Just
reform
just
goes in.
retirements.
Yeah, pension reform goes into effect this year, so right now, everybody has to come out if you want, keep a good portion. of
Yeah,
your
I don't know STRS exactly. I know from SERS, I think it's 2017 If we didn't retire, if we were eligible to retire and didn't retire by July 1 of 2017, then the new rules applied to us. So a lot of SERS people,
Category B.
myself included, went, fine, I'll pull a pension. Yeah.
Right, so are we starting to see a mass exit yet, or, I
I'm-
mean, is that a concern? I mean, I see.
Scott can answer that, and it will have an impact. We will factor that in. It'll be a fiscal 16 budgetary question.
That's what I was gonna say. Because the departure of more retirees than what we've typically had are not gonna impact these numbers, because these are FY15. What we're gonna see is, and we are tracking those, and we've looked back 5 years to see what the trend is. We do have a larger than normal, much larger than normal, announcement of retirements, but those are gonna hit in FY16. So we're taking those into account as we look at the personnel budget for next year. Because we're gonna have a large group leave, replace those with new staff, as well as staffing that we're looking at for legal, contractual, compliance type of issues that we're going to need to add some new staff to address. Those are all gonna be FY16 impacts, so you won't see anything impacting us on the current year.
So the people that are leaving, that left mid-year, and, you know, we're seeing people retire before June 30th
And
this year.
that's gonna be a very,
They're
very
small?
small number. You're gonna see a big number that's gonna hit in next year's proposal.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
please
that's
continue,
personnel.
right?
On the non-personnel side, we had a fairly sizable swing from over budget to under budget. We're now running 1.5 million, or about 1% under plan on a year-to-date basis versus about 2.2 million over plan. And that flip was primarily driven by two lines. Purchase services had a drop in its variance, and other objects.
Can you remind me what other objects is, if we,
Well, yes.
I
in
hate
fact, I talked about
non-specific
that.
ledger
It's,
descriptions like that.
I think the largest item down there in other objects is dues and fees. Dues and fees, it's not like, club
Oh.
membership dues and fees, that's not what that is. Dues and fees, like county auditor and treasurer fees is a large item. And in that regard, again,
that's correct. Okay.
jumping forward to that other objects line, that swing was really, had I looked at the numbers and realized what was going on with that SERS charge, that it had been in the 840s and not in the 200 line, we would have modified our estimate, and this wouldn't be a variance.
Now, on purchase services, are we experiencing anything because the year's winding down with charter and vouchers?
Well, we're watching that charter number because I put that graph in on page 6, and as you can see, it is tracking it's a very horizontal line, same amount every month for the charter schools. And heretofore, it has ebbed and flowed. We have no current reason to believe that that number will change, because the student reporting is more frequent this year, as I understand it, than it was in prior years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but didn't their system just go down? The system for the charters to report have been down since November, they just came back up. And so they're trying to true up their numbers now, because of a glitch that it's an ODE glitch. And so they're experiencing some headaches around not having accurate numbers, so I'm not sure. I guess I would say keep a good eye on how they true up, because they were offering that if it was less than 5% variance, they were gonna take it on the chin, but that anyone with more of a 5% variance, from what I read, will have to do something, to make it or repay it. But I just wonder if our number will change because of their student number.
Great question, and would love to have an answer to that. As it looks now, though, relative to our plan, you'll see in the future month, we should improve in terms of coming back onto plan and perhaps maybe even running under plan on that number, unless something like that pops up in the last few months of the fiscal year. Did we have, refresh my memory, did we have anything where the numbers from 14 flowed into 15. Did they do any catch-up that crossed the fiscal year, or was it just the latter part of the fiscal year where we got hit pretty hard?
The latter part of it.
Okay, which is why you can see in the graph, the red bar spikes at the end of the year. That's where they're making corrections and catching up, and then all of a sudden, you know, if you didn't plan enough for it, if you looked in the first few months and said, hey, we're doing great, if we project this out, we've got, you know, available budget to reallocate. If you reallocated, you would have been in trouble. So although.
But we don't have any explanation as to why it was so volatile last year and it's so consistent this year?
Just the way they reported numbers, charter schools. And I don't know whether they're requiring or allowing them to report them more frequently.
They are reporting.
There's something
frequently
dramatic
now.
changed, and that's.
There was a change,
Mhm.
a state change that the way that, they count their students, and it wasn't a monthly basis, it was a few times a year and that was it, correct? And now they're doing it monthly.
So that's what's happened.
We have
Last year it was
a
just
better,
volatility.
clear
Now it's-
effect on the
I think the
district.
state auditor has been after
Yeah.
that, them on a number of levels, so that'll be helpful if they can level that out for us.
And there could be some more
Right.
reform here shortly as well, it seems like. Some of the legislation.
Good.
But when you say 477 open enrollment, you're talking about students?
Oh, no, that's the, like
That's the
the
object
code.
I'm sorry.
How many, do you know how many students this represents?
I do not.
10 million divided by whatever the 16,000, a very rough estimate would be divided by the per pupil sort of.
If you, and just remind everybody, we're a little spread out here, so just speak up so everybody can hear from one side to the
We're
other.
making an educated guess.
Stan, I think you're doing fine.
We were talking over here because
Yeah.
I don't always, I mean, it's okay, I don't see the detail every month, and I'm not sure what detail we get on the number of students, but we can look at that. That piece of data somewhere. I mean, it underlies this number. There's a child attached to every one of these dollars, so we can get that count. So with that explanation, I don't see anything here alarming that causes me to recommend any sort of a behavioral change. And
What this is suggesting, though, is you could have a very nice pickup in the latter months, because we forecasted it to go up. And the behavior so far is just flat line, which we think may be the new normal.
Could be. That, and also I think that in central Ohio, there's been other things going on that awareness, I think, to a certain degree, that's also sort of going on that it's hard to tell about over the years, because they've had sort of, or I think not artificial numbers, but they've had sort of, they're sort of guessing.
Volatility or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
And this
That
is,
might be a better word.
in the, I look at the school budgets, the things that we can easily turn on and turn off. You know, personnel-related items are hard to turn off. Charter school, or community schools, hard to turn off. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. So you begin to look at this and say, well, if we can't react quickly within a fiscal year, how do you budgetarily respond to that? And that's where the conservative budgeting comes into place. Allow sufficient funds, knowing full well that it's best to come in under on expenditures and hopefully over on revenues, but keeping in mind, again, that cushion, and when you get to a different process called the 5-year forecast, you don't want those kinds of budgetary practices to be exacerbated in a 5-year forecast, because the 5-year forecast is a trigger for another activity the board gets involved in, which is levy requests or budget cuts. So we don't want that to swing too wildly and then decide to do something that isn't necessarily a necessity to do. I don't know how better to
That
put
could be
that.
destructive.
And although and this is just a guess, but I think it's probably going to happen. It's staying, like they said, that pretty steady. It'll be a higher amount, I imagine, next year when they increase the per pupil amount that you get for your voucher or for school choice. That's about to go up to a certain amount, and you multiply that out by the students, it's a sizable chunk of change, whatever, it's 5,800 now, if they move it up to 6,000 or some of the other numbers that they've been throwing around. in the biennial
Without any
budget.
corresponding increase to the funding to the base school system?
Correct.
Wow.
It's, because that would be how much we would be on the hook to reimburse.
Yeah,
Because
without
that's
any
what we're saying, the
corresponding new funds
the
to
per pupil.
offset that.
And I don't know exactly how our state share and our local, how that component sort of works. We're on the hook for a certain amount, and the state picks up the other part of it.
I would say, I would ask maybe once that state budget becomes a little clearer,
Mhm.
maybe we could do a little bit of a deep dive here so that everybody can understand that. And I think that'll dovetail with, as we get the forecast together, but once that'll be,
huge
early in
driver
the
to
summer.
next year's budget.
But I think that would, just so we understand that on the going forward basis, at least for this next fiscal year then.
Okay?
So with that, are there any additional questions on the monthly financial report?
I really appreciate the additional
Yes.
detail and clarity of what's going, it's much, it's very,
Absolutely.
very easy to follow, and
Well, I'm basically
helpful.
writing to you as I, we're at month 8, I think, and I'm basically writing down what I learned. So it's good all the way around.
Great.
and I think
I
in
certainly
terms of
appreciate it.
supplemental, that understanding that enrollment number, if you can get your hands on it for both forecasting and understanding these numbers would be really helpful.
Yeah, Jody?
I guess that would be my one thing, is that we're pretty sure that this property tax delay is gonna straighten itself out, that it's not gonna, okay. So, okay, that would be my one thing.
But I
Pretty
think we
sure
gotta-
is correct.
We gotta keep an eye on it, because pretty sure isn't money in the bank, so we gotta
If it's just
keep
timing,
watching
it's
it.
fine, but if we get to the end of that and say, oh, these property values change, well, and you explained in the previous lesson that it's not really, the tax we receive isn't based on the value of that property, so it can change, but we're still supposed to get the same dollar amount, so. That's good. I'm good.
So that's all I have on the financial
Okay.
report.
Very good. I think, do we have a motion for approval to accept the report?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, so next we'll move to the follow-up discussion on the budget process. From our last meeting, we did the non-personnel expense overview. So we'll turn it over to Scott Gooding, see if we have, where are we at this point, and then what are our next steps, and also, I think, see if the committee has questions from the last meeting as well.
Absolutely. The first document you have is just, as we've done each meeting, just an update on the timetable that we have. And obviously, as activities roll through the year, we're just updating those and making changes on here, just so you can see that. The second staple document that you have.
And real quick
Sorry.
on this
Yes.
one, is there any, let's see, were there any changes, any big change swings from our last review?
Nothing added, just obviously, as finance committee meetings have happened, if board meetings have happened, if we progress through that, you'll see on the second page, the activity through March, everything's now at 100%, so we're now into the, in February, so the March activity is what we're into now. Heavily after getting through the non-personnel piece, now we're really focused on the personnel component, so that's a piece that we're really entrenched in right now, so that we'll be able to bring that forward to the committee in the future.
Okay, great.
The next staple document, these are the items that we printed out of the PowerPoints. These should look very familiar to you, so I brought those together. The top page is all of the non-personnel items by object. So these are, as we've discussed before with the 5-year forecast, the May forecast is a new approach for us, very different from the October, because the October looked at what the current budget was and basically extrapolated that out for the next 4 years. Our approach now is not doing it that way, but aligning it based on the needs and proposals that were submitted by all the departments. So instead of having the numbers drive the academic plan, we're having the academic plan drive the financial plan. So what we'll see in May, and I know Stan has a timeline for how that all fits together, and his timeline's aligned with the timeline that I have, so we're all in sync on those. but you'll see how that stuff fits together. So these objects what will be factored into the 5-year forecast that we're working on, and I think we'll bring the committee in April and have the board present it to the board for approval in May. So that's how this piece will fit into that. What you'll see here, there's a new column to this page. It's the third column from the right. What we presented were all of the preliminary requests, and then there were proposed adjustments that we made to those in the tune of almost $29.4 million. Primarily, those were all in the business operations side. Those adjustments are also spelled out the last page of this document that you've seen those before. The revised adjustments, these are changes that we have made since the February meeting to now. At that point, we were proposing an increase above what we were projecting for next year of $8.9 million. We went back to the administration and worked through that to figure out where we could tighten things up even a little bit further. As far as even in Maurice's shop and business operations, we looked at current activity that we're doing, and we were doing well in some areas of transportation, for example. That we were actually able to save some money this year, so that we were able to, for like the phone system, we had $100,000 in the proposal for next year. We're able to actually fund that out of our current budget because we've done so well in some areas. That means that we got to reduce what we were projecting for next year. So we actually reduced transportation by $75,000. We moved that out of the proposal for next year because we can anticipate covering that now. We looked at moving the pieces and getting the funds in there for the career tech budget, which is operating unit 921. So those are now reflected in here. So we've got the dollars in there, about $173,000. The career tech piece is where it needs to be. The big piece that we looked at that really made the biggest jump was the textbook piece. There's math adoptions that we had projected in the budget for next year. It was a combination of digital curricula as well as hard textbooks. So obviously when we built a proposal, we built that looking as if every student had a hard textbook to take home. But we knew financially that might not make the most sense, and how can we balance that with the online curricula that's available. So we went back and we took out $3.5 million, still thinking that we can accommodate those needs. And I'm looking back at Alicia back there, and she's nodding in agreement with me. So you got a finance guy talking the academic language,
And
which
she's
sometimes
welcome to
gets
come up
scary.
if you, yeah.
I got the thumbs up too, I'll take that as a good sign. So we reduced to $3.5 million from the textbook budget. So when you look at it, we still have $3.5 million in there for next year, because I know one of the questions that Tim had is what's eating the large increase? Well, the large increase, if we're looking at an increase of $4.2 million, it is the textbook piece. In the past, how we have funded textbook adoptions have been through bond issues. Well, those bond dollars, those capital dollars, are earmarked for Ohio School Facility Commission, OSFC projects. So those funds aren't available to do textbook adoptions because we have not funded, I'm looking at Mike to correct me if I'm wrong, we have not funded textbook adoptions since 2008. So we have textbooks that are not aligned to our current courses of study and the Ohio Common Core. So we're not teaching what's being expected at this point. Yeah.
Not so much.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
So, just a question about, if we reduce the number of hard textbooks, we are thinking what takes its place, the online curriculum?
We're looking at more class sets and books that kids could check out through the library. So we would still have some that kids would be able to, access and take home, but that not every kid would be able to take one home. Is that correct, Alicia?
That is correct.
Okay.
So there will be classroom sets, and there would also be a set in the
Yeah.
library.
Let's see. Why don't you come up where the superintendent's seat is?
Hello.
Hello. Do you remember Alicia Gillison?
Oh, yes.
Alicia Gillison, Chief Academic Officer. Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Gooding was absolutely correct. What we're looking at is classroom sets, and then also the library. The libraries would also have a supply of textbooks for those kids if they wanted to check them out and take them home. The digital component allows parents to get online at home and to actually see what the young people are doing and see what the assignments are. So young people that don't want to take those books home and they have computer access at home or at the library or on their cell phone, they can still access their textbooks in that manner.
Oh, that's great.
My question would be, if we augmented the textbooks to online curricula, what then are we doing to ensure internet access for these students? Because if we move it to an online and students don't have online at home, even though some do, I don't know that we can say that a majority of our students do with any great accuracy. How then do we ensure that the students who need help, who's going to tell mom, I don't have a book. I heard that one before. How do we close that loop if we don't have those textbooks to ensure access to material?
Students will have the access at school, online at school, and when we talk about not being able to have the access in homes, because you're absolutely correct, not all of our students have internet access at home, but they can access it at school. And we are looking, and that is a phase-in process, to ensure that all of our kids have the technology to do what they need to do. But right now, we are in a situation such as Mr. Gooding talked about 2008, the last textbook adoption. The last math textbook adoption was 2004. And since that time, we have adopted the Ohio Common Core, and it is this new adoption process we're looking at. It is aligned with the new Common Core.
Well, I have a question. I've heard from some teachers that they really aren't using as many texts. They'll pull material from internet sources, other places, and also tailor it to the needs of different students. So if students are, some of the more advanced students in the class versus some that might need remedial help, does that shift where the resources would go, say, from text to copies or other types of material that would, that the teachers would use in lieu of a textbook?
Now, there's a component called consumables, and in the past, what consumables are the workbooks. But we had consumables in the past, but students weren't able to take the consumables. So what teachers were doing, where they were pulling the resources from the consumables, or like you said, Board Member Hudson, they were going to the internet, finding certain resources for our young people. That's great, but then if every teacher is doing that, then that means every class potentially could be doing something different. And when we're trying to align all of our resources, the books and the consumable component of the books that we're going to have now, the workbooks, they will be able to pull all of those resources that we know that are aligned to the Ohio Common Core from those materials.
Okay.
Does that help?
Sort of. I mean, whether it would be the teacher selecting the material or there's a, common source, sort of a main source that everybody goes to. But does that change the nature of, that's what I've heard from some teachers as I've talked to them about that. Well, gosh, we don't use textbooks as much because, there's the online resource, the Chromebooks in the classes, and then I work with various levels of students, and one size doesn't fit all.
Correct. Well, the textbooks that we've been looking at, pretty much they have the interventions, they also have the enrichments, and the reason we are in the position which is a great position to be in, where our teachers are actually going out and seeking the information, is because we haven't had it in the past.
Understood.
So once we went over to Common Core, well, we have these young people and we have to get them up to speed. So let's look at other areas and other ways to find our resources. So they've been doing a great job, but we want to make it a little easier for them.
So will those resources kind of be centralized so those teachers can print them off? Or are they like in an electronic format as well so they can go and find and print them?
Yes, Mr. Johnson, you're absolutely correct.
Great.
Because that textbook is digitalized, so
Oh,
they
great.
can pull the information off of the computer, or they have what we call the consumables, which are the worksheets or workbooks with different chapters and different standards in them that they will be addressing.
So, Scott, so then there's a mathematic line that got adjusted by 1.1. Is that book, is that,
It was
Is
it was
it
interesting when you made
curriculum?
where to put this, because the textbook piece was really in two places. That 1.1 in the mathematics was the digital component.
I got
So
you.
instead of trying to split it out, we left it all as part of the textbooks, but we may, depending on what the combination looks like.
Okay.
It may go back from textbooks to, the number's not gonna change, it's just
Right.
where it sits.
We
And I
just
do wanna say.
basically had to double count it.
Well, there was the
before.
hard textbooks, and then there was the digital piece.
And you were
So
counting
it was
both, you didn't need both.
So we needed to look at what that was,
Makes
and I'm gonna go off task here, so I'll warn you ahead of time, but sitting through the presentation, because my undergrad was in mathematics, and obviously dealing with finance and numbers, I love that stuff. There's no other way to say it, it was really cool in the presentation that they gave,
Right.
and to see how far the instruction and the capabilities for online learning were there, so much so that if I'm on there taking whatever, if I'm doing quadratic equations and I'm struggling in a certain area, the system is going to know that I'm struggling. It's going to take me back automatically to figure it out, and then as I progress, and once I get to a certain point, it's gonna go back and check me.
Wow.
And when I heard this and saw this, I mean, it blew me away. I was like,
Right.
this is just, wow.
but do you
It was-
feel,
It was amazing.
do you
Instant
feel
feedback.
comfortable
Yeah, it was really neat.
with the baseline of books and what you propose? Do you feel comfortable that that's an adequate number to, bring a baseline for all your students?
I do, and we vetted that number, and we've been vetting the number and looking at what we can do and what we can't do, and yes, I am comfortable with saying.
Okay,
Okay.
great, great.
Just to clarify the whole subject, so textbooks and the mathematical digital components that are digital textbooks cost a certain amount of money. We're reducing that, so I imagine we're reducing our reliance on those two mediums because we're using other sources that are still aligned to our curriculum, and we're still able to sort of execute the same sort of level of.
The
I mean,
plan
is
was
that where the
built to give a
saving is?
textbook for every kid. So we've backed away from that and have moved more to the class set, allowing kids to check books out, as opposed to providing a math textbook for every kid. So that's where we've scaled that piece back.
And from a numbers perspective, you had originally loaded $7 million. Now you're saying we can achieve this with this more creative strategy for $4.3 million.
Right.
Which is still more than what you had originally budgeted, but it's because you haven't had updated books for X number of years.
That is
Correct.
absolutely correct.
Now, a little twist on this, and we've talked through this a little bit, and
Don't look at me.
I'm going. Amazing people shake their heads when we did this, so I stand to know exactly where I'm going. Timing becomes a real critical issue on this. This budget doesn't get approved till June, orders don't get placed till July, school starts in the fall. We're going to have an issue. So some of the things that we've looked at, again, trying to minimize this, the reason that we have 3.5 million still in here is that the recommendation to do the bare minimum was 5 million. Well, if we have 3.5 million budgeted, that's not there. In the current textbook account, we have 1.5 million still remaining. What we'd like to do.
Current fiscal
Current
year.
fiscal year. What we'd like to do is use that 1.5 million, and we have a budget reserve set aside of 6 million. We would like to go to the board, borrow from that now, so take that 3.5 million we're proposing for next year, move it to the current year, so that we can order the books during FY15, so that they arrive for use in FY16. But what that will do is, in the proposed budget, we'll take that 3.5 million out. But I showed it in here so you would see what the overall impact is. We're just moving from what we're proposing in 16, increase it in 15 to pay for it now, to order it now, and then we'll reduce that in 16. But it'll still show up as a timing of what the expense will look like. We just got to figure out how we do that, if it's a fund-to-fund transfer, something like that too, so that we can account for that in the cash flow next year.
So since we do annual budgets, are we always gonna be in this situation, or we have to take another approach when it comes to items like this and making sure it gets appropriated before
Um,
school year starts? And then have it just be reflected in the numbers for a year, basically a year and a half, 2 years beforehand,
Or you allocate for 2 times in 1 year so that you're on cycle, or,
And a lot of places do that. Districts that I've been in, just speaking from personal experience, it was a different funding source. So districts that I was in had a continuous permanent improvement levy. Part of that was that every year there's a course of study up for adoption. So it wasn't a general fund expense, it was a permanent improvement levy. And that's where those dollars came. Every year something was up. Now, we didn't necessarily buy a new textbook if we didn't need to, but every year, this year was math, next year is language arts, social studies, whatever it was, but there was a cycle. We don't have a cycle because we don't have ongoing funds to pay for that outside the general fund. So it's a funding question, because we've not had a textbook adoption included in the general fund like this for a very long time, because it's been funded out of capital dollars.
We've not gotten that far in that conversation, but that's the logical
Something we
next
look at.
conversation, because the question, when this was proposed to encumber the funds in fiscal 15, I said, well, that $3.5 million is still gonna show up as an expense in fiscal 16, by the time we're on cash basis accounting.
Yeah.
And so when we go to set up our numbers, our plan for 16, we can't do what's appropriated because we've reduced it by $3.5 million. We're going to have to up that. So what used to be our appropriation resolution approved in June was our plan for the fiscal year. And that works as long as that encumbrance number is the same at both ends. You move that, you shift it, and then you cause a kind of an interesting, just it's something we explained. In fact, we've laid it out there, and everybody here is nodding their heads. You seem to understand that, so that it doesn't become a kind of a smoke and mirrors game. But the next logical step, to Mr. Peretti's comment, is exactly that, is what do you do in April and May of next year? I'm not on the educational side, but I would argue that, A, you have a textbook adoption plan that's on a regular routine cycle, that you make a commitment to fund it from the general fund, and then you bite the bullet now and say, do the 3.5 increase this year. We're not even talked about this. I'm talking solely out of school here. This is just me. And that you don't reduce the 16. Dr. Good might shoot me, I don't know, but you don't reduce the 16 budget. You leave it there, but you say to Alicia, you can't order all of that at the front end of the year. You have to save 3.5 for the latter part of the year, budgetarily. Don't come back to me in April and say, I don't have enough for text. Don't come back to me in April. But we've not had that. We're working that it's a catharsis here to get to that point. How do we budget, encumber, spend, and then have that show up report line?
Well, and also, it sounds like the finance side, but also it's about putting a longer-term plan in place. So
You're not
that
doing
there's more
this
stability
big,
to that
right.
cyclical.
servicing.
Well, it would have been cyclical in '08 had we went to the ballot. It had the '08 levy passed, it would have been bond plus levy, books, and it would have all been wrapped up in there. Missing that cycle, we are now 8 years behind, as you said, since '04, or 12, I mean, maybe 12 in that way, but the 12 levy is what has stretched us out, even further than what we scheduled, because we would have had the bond, we could have wrapped it up and put them all in there. And who knew Common Core? I mean, 6 months ago, we thought Common Core might be dead, but, you know, it yet lives, and so we have to plan, we're still full steam ahead. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Other questions?
So really, when you look at,
Yes.
in summary, versus what we projected for next year as part of the October forecast on non-personnel versus what we have before you today, we're looking at an additional $4.2 million versus what was done. So that is like I said, the general fund non-personnel piece. We're very, very comfortable and solid with these proposals at this time. The next piece that we'll get into is, as I said, we're going through the staffing analysis now, going through Article 211 processes. I mean, we're knee deep in personnel right now. So that's a piece that we're getting into, and it's not just existing staff, but as we've had issues that we've dealt with the special education audit and the corrective action plan that we have in place, there are some deficiencies, if you
We
will, in number
talked
of
about
staff.
that at the last meeting, I think, didn't we? That the district has there are 2 different agreements, consent agreements with the Department of Education on ESL, and then staffing, and also special ed staffing. So those commitments are legal requirements that we have to improve. Did we talk, I think that was referenced, but we also covered an awful lot of territory. The audit committee's heard a little bit more about it in detail, the proposed, or the plans that are out there, so. Yes, Board Member Gibbs?
I guess I had the one question, that as we look at the 5-year forecast, it might be good to blend textbooks and curriculum digital and not have it broken out by whether it's paper or online. Because in 5 years, it could be, I think, the days of everybody having their own textbook is in the olden days, I would
Right.
say.
And another way of looking at it too, that we've talked about is, if they're math textbooks, why not put it in the mathematics budget as opposed to a textbooks budget? Because they can go multitude of different ways in terms of how we present it and where we code those.
Although
Something
I
to
do
think
think,
about.
I think where we are, I would like to understand more about what the plan is to migrate. So, from hard copy to digital, because we still have ways to go for that. So I think that just so that, and both, not just from the finance perspective, but from the board hat on. So to make sure that there's a longer term plan for that, which I think we're seeding.
Well, and I guess what I'll say is I've subbed in schools where the textbook stays in the room and they don't have a digital option. So
Yeah.
you use it in the classroom, or maybe they have one in the library, but I guess, so this, to me, sounds normal.
Okay,
That's what I've experienced.
okay, good.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing, and then it's time to help with homework, and I have nothing. And they're like, it's online, but parents don't have access to the login to the software, or, so when we talk about digital integration, it's not just, hey, this is the teacher and the student, it's also for the supports when they get home, if you want a parent engagement portion or someone to help. And 3rd grade math is hard, let me tell you. I said, don't send home anything else without the answer sheet, because, Scott's not gonna be there to answer my call when they're doing that 3rd grade algebra. And that's the very real part of it, that everyone has to use it, the whole family has to use it. When they get in middle and high school, that's great, but if your school isn't using an in-grade system, as a parent, you have no way to monitor how well your child is doing unless you go to parent-teacher conference or that D or that C comes home. And so we have to think about how to integrate the whole family, or the support unit that is going to help those students. And even, and our Board Member Hudson talked about community broadband, and then thinking about ways where we can be a more connected city. And I don't have to worry, and I don't know if our families know, you can get, or last year they had, you can have internet access for $10 a month for a family, but then do you have a computer? So we have a ways to go, but my concern would always be whether it's science or math, or we're just saying textbook. We're talking about math, but it could be any single one, that those who want it can have it, and we don't have 6 kids that want a book and 5 books. Like, that would be the heartbreak for me. Not that I think 6 kids would say, oh yeah, I want to do homework tonight, but just in case they did, that those resources would be available to support. So that's that. But my question actually is, in the Encore Unified Arts, the line item goes from 83 to 308. I'm not sure I caught that. I'm on, it's not numbered, but in the proposed budget, it's non-personnel. Can you just tell me what that?
It's on the 3rd page of the handout, the
Under
last line
academic
in that top set of, top chart.
Yes.
It says Encore Unified Arts, the first is school buildings.
83 to 308.
We might need to get some additional information for you, but some of the things that we're looking at that I'm seeing are high-ticket items, or like repairs to instruments, and then the kilns that they use in the art programs. That's a piece that's there, and then there's a large increase in some of the, what is identified as general supplies to support those programs, so I can get a more detailed list of those and get those to you.
Because it's a significant jump. The art, I just wanted to know, it's a $225,000 difference, if you could just tell me what that is.
And I think one of the things we had talked about, and I think before the end of the budget cycle, if there'd be a way to do the comparison of the transportation costs, so we could do it, because the line items, it's difficult to match it on a line item basis, so that we've got kind of a
Apples to apples.
last apples to apples, thank you. But, you know, compare, even though they're different line items, we match it up to see what the differences are. Yes?
Just another question about the change. Can you tell me about the change of safety and security? Is it, some of the that's, but it's more matching.
Is it, it's the second,
Business operations under Mr. Maurice Holden.
300,000.
fourth page,
Maybe Mr. Murray Sutton would like to address that question.
958. It just shows a reduction, or a change, 31,000,
Yeah.
226 change.
The one that says 50,000.
That was an adjustment.
That was an
So
adjustment.
that was a piece that was taken out of their original proposal.
Okay, what did we take out? I know we took it out, but what services are being augmented and safety?
That piece, it was a vehicle, so we removed the vehicle from the.
Is that what you?
I heard the yeah over there. Yeah, there was a vehicle replacement that they had placed in there, and we removed that piece
But
from it.
staffing is the same?
Staff, there's no staffing in this yet. This is all non-personnel.
Non-personnel. I
Correct.
just want to make sure it's a car.
Car but no driver.
Good,
That
good,
does,
okay. Other questions
Yeah,
about the?
just
Yes.
going up to 10,000 feet here. The 246 is now what you guys are proposing after certain adjustments. That's compared to the
The 240,
2006 forecast, 2016 forecast is,
the 242.
yeah, the 242. That's what we should be hanging our hat
Correct.
on because that's what's in your 5-year plan. And so ultimately, this $4 million variance is what we would, you know, last time I was talking about something that said, these are the 10 major items or the 15, whatever materiality threshold that, because you gave us a lot of information last time and I forgot about the car coming out, but, you know, what are the big drivers that are really, you know, textbooks is a big component of that.
Right.
And I guess the other comment I would make is as I look at that change column, it doesn't look like it foots to me. So I've got a +6, a +4 million, another 6.7, I only got 2.5 million coming out. And it seems like that variance by line doesn't tie to the $4 million. You know, I just started to foot down there because I was trying to identify, the difference of the 4.2 is all about textbooks. And I said, no, there's another $6 million line, what's going on there?
Who's
And-
fast with their calculator?
And I think it's because it may be keying off the wrong line, the 2015 revised versus the 2016 forecast on some of them. For example, I'm sorry, that if you look at purchase services, 202 is the forecast, 200 million is the proposed, but it says there's a $6 million variance.
Just look at the
No,
variance.
I pulled up the spreadsheet and it is, the bottom number is looking at the forecasted budget compared to the proposed requests, and the columns, the rows ahead of that are actually going back to the revised budget, so, yeah.
So that, you know, if we clean that up, then we can really see where the variances are,
Absolutely.
which is $4 million, which may be explainable in 10 items or something, which that would be helpful for me, who's not as informed as a lot of folks on.
That's helpful for me too.
Yeah, very good,
Good catch.
good point.
Madam Chairman, I want to
Yes.
go back to our discussion about the evolution of printed text to electronic text.
Sure, sure.
And as, this is a finance question, as you look toward that evolution, is the cost savings less by going digital versus printed material? And that's just a question out of curiosity.
Print- Are we heading toward the digital format with textbooks? Is that going to be, in the long run, cheaper than what traditionally we usually spend on hard textbooks?
That's my question.
Thank you for the question.
Sure.
And in a manner of speaking, because when we go all digital, then that means our infrastructure, our technology infrastructure, that we have to do some massive work for our technology infrastructure. So we may be transferring one cost from one area to another. But that is the plan.
Sure.
And I guess from a larger infrastructure standpoint, you guys have a site that has all your library, I mean, like a distribution center for all
We
these
have a
books,
warehouse.
right? You have a warehouse.
Yes.
And you have libraries and stuff in some of your schools, in a lot of your schools. So I guess if, from a long-term planning standpoint, if you're gonna migrate to digital, that would really present maybe a larger discussion about how to address.
Migrate that
Yeah.
resource.
I mean, those resources to support all that text.
The libraries are always evolving as well with various different mediums as well. It's not just books, there's a lot of electronic themed items there and other things that I'm sure they have
And our
accumulated over
yeah.
time with
I got you.
technology changes. So libraries will on face, I'm sure, change as well, which would be probably part of the conversation that we would be having. What's the library gonna look like 15, 20 years from now?
Right. Just the same evolution that Columbus
Mhm.
Public is
Yeah.
going through.
But
My
to your
apologies
point,
for-
you don't have to plug in a book,
Yeah,
right? You don't have to be connected to a satellite to read a book. So differentiated learning, in some ways, must always still be a part, because even though they have e-readers, the people still love books.
Right.
And so, reaching all kids the way they learn, I think it will beg a very long discussion and embrace it. We have to embrace technology for those who do, but also keep, those who don't like bright screens, who love books. And we'll have to just keep options open so that, we're able to teach and reach children in every medium, I think.
my apologies for stepping out for a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or issues on this information? I'm wondering if we could maybe shift over to talking about the timetable, just because this is still just a partial snapshot of the full budget. And so Scott, tell us a little bit more about how we bring all this together, and because we are dancing on the head of a pin in terms of personnel numbers plus the state budget mystery, et cetera. So
The next step is in April, is we'll start to bring in the staffing component for the committee to see. And we are anticipating, and I'm looking for some feedback here from the committee and the board members in terms of how you'd like to see this. Because we would like to take a presentation to the second board meeting in April. What that looks like, involvement, because this is a kind of a first go around with us with this new process. I'm fine getting up and putting something together. Obviously, it won't be, so the board members don't panic, it won't be another 109 slide presentation. I assure you, much more condensed, much more succinct. But if there are members from the committee that would like to be involved in that presentation, I'm just kind of throwing that out there as just as an option, something to consider. If the board would want to do that, if the committee members want to be part of that.
And this
open
is,
to that.
wait, this is the presentation
To
to
the
this
board.
committee or
To the
to the
board.
board? So that would be at,
That is the April 21st meeting.
okay.
So I'd like to just do it for presentation and get it out there, because that will become the baseline for FY16 for the 5-year forecast that will come for presentation on May 5th and then for approval on May 19th. So this will be the kind of the first very, big public presentation, even though these are public meetings. It'll be the first presentation to the community at large of what this will look like, and then it will feed into the 5-year forecast. So we'll present the second meeting in May, the proposal.
April.
In April, yeah, April 21st. May 5th will be the initial presentation of the 5-year forecast. We'll come back on May 19th with approval of the 5-year forecast. And then in June, we come back and present the appropriations resolution, which is the summary of all funds at each individual fund level for board approval at the second meeting in June.
So from a timing standpoint, what I put up on the screen, which you also have in your packets, is, I'll call it my timetable for preparing the 5-year forecast. And I start with board approval on the 19th and work backwards. It's a new practice that I introduced to prepare the 5-year forecast in sufficient advance, well, early enough so that I can do 2 presentations. One, to present it in a hearing format, if you will, and take comments in between that meeting and the next for final approval. So my deadline is May 19th for the board approval. May 5th, you back up to, that's when I need to present it. I back up from there to when do I have to do things like brief the board, put it on the agenda, have the finance committee review it, and then when do I really start to prepare it, and what do we know along the way? What you see here is that our prep of the 5-year forecast, data is already being compiled right now. We will have more intense internal conversations about that between the 21st and 1st of April. That's kind of on our schedule right now, heading towards a first presentation of the 5-year forecast to the committee on the 16th, when we're still in the middle of the personnel piece. Okay? So this is going to be a real question, and unless I'm told otherwise, I will tell you it's either in or it's not in. It's not like, well, we've got about 80%. No. Either it's in or it's not in. And when we know that it's going to be in, we have time to adjust that 5-year forecast before its approval. We can even do that in between the 5th, between the presentation and the adoption. But if and it's my understanding, the board's desire that this committee see the 5-year forecast, you're going to see it April 16th, and there's a lot of things we won't know. We probably won't know the full personnel piece. We won't know the state budget, and that can have a big revenue impact.
But when will we know, well, we won't know the state budget by the 19th, will we? So,
You're going to have to make assumptions around the
Right.
state
And
budget.
I think the key here is that this committee hear from me, from us, what's in the forecast and what's not, so that July 1 rolls around and we get a number from the state that we've just received notice that our foundation formula is going to increase from X to Y. That board member Gibbs doesn't come to me and smack me because it's a surprise, because in my interview, board member Gibbs says, I do not want any surprises. And so that's why I will say to the committee and to the board, this is in, this isn't in, and this is a huge variable. There's no other way to do this from a timing standpoint. I cannot wait to prepare the 5-year forecast.
When do you think you'll be finished, when do you think the personnel will be finished in April then?
It's going to be.
Before the 24th? I mean, before you start placing it on the agenda?
That date that Stan has on here, that's more of an internal
That's
piece.
when I have to put it on board docs. No, I'm
But
gonna put the
but by
5 year.
then, it should be, you will have the personnel at that point?
It's gonna be pretty close. I know we're working feverishly to get
No, I
through that process.
understand, sure, yeah, definitely.
But should
I
we
just don't
have,
know.
should there be,
Should we wait?
well, no, I'm looking at the calendar in terms of if May 19th is when you want to approve the forecast, is that premature in light of the state budget?
We have no choice.
You have no choice. It has
Oh,
to be
It's a
It has to be
statutory
done.
requirement to adopt
Okay.
it by the end of May. That is correct.
And then we come back again in October.
That's what the state should probably at some point address, the 5-year forecast, the way the budget, and how they line up, I think.
It has to be done by May, and our last meeting is May 19th, and we've historically hit it. That, I mean, it requires administration hustle. And there's a lot of moving parts with personnel, it's a lot of,
So, but
yeah.
to the point we talked about earlier about then doing a deep dive on the state budget, on the state allocation formula, once we know that, we as a committee could review the forecast and that budget in June, and then would know, you know, well before October, if there are any other adjustments that we need to, we would have hit the 19th, but also be able to address that issue.
And keep in mind too, there are 2 statutory requirements for filing the 5-year forecast, October and May. We can sit down in June and say, we've got new information, new significant information. Now our 5-year forecast looks like this, and make sure I do this right, we can refile.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't mean, far be it, I'm not suggesting that we redo the 5-year forecast every month because something changed. I'm that pleased, we're not going there. But if we get to the end of May and realize there are 1 or 2 very significant items that we have no reasonable certainty about, we file the forecast, it's in our notes, we make that in our notes, make that statement so nobody's got a surprise. And when that comes about and I learn of it, we all learn of it, we share that, and then you ask me to prepare, well, you don't have to ask me to prepare. I will prepare a revision to the 5-year forecast and bring it to the committee, and we have that conversation so that we then move into fiscal 16 with the best information we have and the best, most reliable forecast we can have.
And it's just been my experience in the 5-year forecast. We filed in May, and we just, I don't know, just had amazing treasurers. We nailed it. And you wait to see what the State House is going to do, and it has gone every single way possible. You know, we get money, reimbursement for transportation, or, you know, rollback here, you know, whatever they do. But if we look and we know our patterns, we know how we budget, we're conservative, you know, I haven't found that we've ever had to go back, in my experience, Mike, and refile. You know, minus some major swings, there's nothing they couldn't account for. And then use this summer to really look at the data and to say, you know, once we know a little bit more, by the time it comes back in October, the administrative team has enough time to adjust and to talk through if something needs to be changed to the forecast. You know, and that seems to have worked and served us pretty well. So I feel confident. I'm not, you know, I don't see anything that you projected that's so risky that we couldn't do it. But again, we got to see how long the State House want to drag out their budget discussions, and, you know, we may be ready to go in June and they're still having at it, so.
You know, I realize this 5-year forecast that we're working on now is statutorily required to be submitted by the end of May. And the board meeting approval for the 19th is something that has to happen in order to submit it in May. But when you look at the due diligence that we're involved in, is all concentrated on this whole preparation and understanding of the 5-year forecast. And then right behind the 5-year forecast in June, there's this appropriation resolution. Does that take a lot of time and effort and understanding and pre-planning as we're doing with the 5-year forecast? That's just a question.
I would say no. Most of your variables are all gonna be on the general fund side. All the other funds are much more very specific and very limited in the revenue source and the uses of those funds, like state and federal grants. We will receive the allocations for next year in the beginning of June. So we'll know for disadvantaged youth in our Title I programs, we're gonna get X million dollars. Well, we know that that's gonna be the budget because that's all we get. So those pieces are gonna be very, very easy, very simple. We can only fit those within very limited uses, where the general fund we can use for anything. So we'll go through those pieces. Those will be much, much cleaner, not nearly as in-depth as this.
So
as
when
the
will
general fund piece.
when will you bring that information to the Finance Committee?
The appropriation resolution work, though,
Yeah,
what you're doing in this budget,
Yep.
this process, that is the culmination of this. What we're doing now is a 1 year. That's one piece of my 5-year forecast. I have to be done in May, but this 1 year piece, all that you've heard from the budget process, gets done in June. So there is a lot of detail on the general fund side, as you saw, but it happens in June. So by June, every day goes by, we know a little bit more. So really, that 1 year piece for fiscal 16 being done in June is, we'll should have all the information. And on the budget, on the expense side, for the appropriation resolution, to some degree, whether or not we have a state budget done by June, I don't know, may or may not impact that 1 year picture. The state's budget has a more longer-term impact on us.
It's a biennium budget.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. But if you decide to, the board, the committee, if we all collectively decide to do something on the personnel side, it'll be done for 16, has a long-term effect. We have to have that factored into the forecast. So what we get done by May, if you want, if we don't have an exact, we can put a number in and see how close we get, but we'll talk about that. That's part of this whole process, is to talk about where are we, what do we know, what do we don't know, and what would we like to see in the forecast. I may come to you and say, I don't want to put any new personnel in, and I don't want to put anything in the state budget. And you may look at me and say, we don't want to do that. We see these options out there for the state budget, so we believe, let's put that number in, and we all understand we're assuming the state's going to end up doing this. Well, I'm fine with that if we all agree. Scott and others may not be done with the personnel, but we know, well, it's going to be at least X number of people, and that's going to be about this. Let's put that in.
We have to understand that parts of this are going to be not necessarily clear until
Right.
the later part of the month.
Just from a mechanical perspective, though, does the budget have to equal year one of the forecast, or you have cash reserves that you can be plus or minus so that you can draw down reserves, or you can build reserves within a given year, so that the projection is a projection, but the budget could be off that as long as you've got funding, or does it need to be the first year?
Well, and the 5-year forecast is just the general fund. The appropriation, or what we refer to as the budget, is all funds. So we're looking at roughly $700 million of a $1.3 billion is general fund. So in that appropriations resolution, you'll see a general fund number of that, what matches the forecast, and then all the other funds will be added to that to come up with a total appropriation
In
resolution.
answer to your question, typically, yes, they do match.
They do
Yes.
match.
They
For the
do
general
match
fund.
for the general
And the
fund.
one variable that we won't have, that's out of our control, is the state budget. You can have a personnel forecast based on what your programming needs are and what seems acceptable based on a normal kind of state budget funding environment. And you may or may not want to hedge that based on what you're reading on from your lobbyist, et cetera, in terms of where the budget may come. So you have to take a position. I mean, is that that's kind of the way we do it? I mean,
I think you have to make, when you get down to the personnel side, and judging from the magnitude of the ads that might be proposed, you have to decide whether or not you're willing to make those ads, knowing full well that there's a large number out there revenue-wise that you don't have.
how much
any
volatility is in that
Yeah.
budget, or in that
And-
state budget?
And if that volatility scares you enough, then you don't do the ad. If you do the ad, and you know that number may come in lower, you'll have to have a response to that behaviorally later on. But the important thing, so there are no surprises, is to lay all that information out to the committee. And so that on April 16th, when I bring a 5-year forecast in here, that you'll hear the assumptions I've made, you'll hear where the budget process is, and we can make an informed decision as to what should really be in that forecast.
And what is the role of this committee? So I assume we're advisory.
Yes.
And so you come on the 16th and you present something that we would suggest adjustments to, that's simply an advisory to the board who's ultimately going to review that.
Right.
So
That's what I was. and
that's
I
given
was-
us enough work time to say, here's some
Yes.
feedback, then you to react to it in order to get something to the board
And
that
that's what I was looking at.
takes that feedback.
At the cadence, we would look at on the 16th, if there are revisions, there's really not
Enough.
additional time built in to come back to the committee. Because you've got a board briefing listed on here on the 28th, which is not
So
it's
they do that
like
week
a work
before.
session.
No, well, that board briefing is with President and Vice President. That's what we do. That's an internal thing. The
Oh.
agenda, it's an agenda walkthrough is what it is. I put this here just to show you that in order for.
Well,
me to
that's
do-
not, then that, I
That's
think that
not
should
really
come
a
off there,
deadline.
because it's not a board briefing then.
Okay,
Because the board that isn't a board briefing.
right.
But I'm thinking, if there's gonna be a lot of changes between the 16th and the 5th, should we schedule something that's a special meeting for the committee to, maybe it's on that 28th as well, that we just touch base on those, so it wouldn't be a monthly financial report, et cetera, it would just be on the deltas that are part of that change in the follow-up from the 16th.
Yeah, happy with doing something like that, yes.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
April 16th, we review it. Board meetings on the 5th. I mean, you have ample time.
So you have the 28th on there, and I'm just wondering if this group, if we could come back together, to do that kind of just
Update.
follow-up update. So it
That
would
gives
just
you
be
sufficient time
updates.
to process the
Yes.
input.
Yeah.
And then, so at the board meeting on the 5th, then as you present to the board, can say this has been, the finance committee has reviewed this as well, and here were their comments, or, their prior comments were incorporated into this presentation.
We can come like the 30th, that's the Thursday,
Yeah.
whatever works best, so.
Yeah,
I mean, after the 16th presentation, anything that happens, if there's anything dramatic, for some reason, the state finalizes or personnel numbers come in, I can plug that in, ship it off to you. This is the change, see it on the 30th, and that's already been on the board agenda.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. we
But
can
then
do
if we
that.
had comments, it's a little fluid, but I think then that would give everybody a opportunity to just do that. I think it's important we have the cadence that this committee's had an opportunity to review everything and let the board know that we've reviewed it. Yes, Jody?
So we're considering meeting again April 30th, is that on?
It's
at
either,
Finance
the
Committee?
28th or 30th, yes. I mean, we could do, so we'd meet on the 16th, then we would do a special meeting on the 30th.
Maybe
If
we could
that-
send out notice for some
If
of the
that would
members to
work,
look at their calendars.
if maybe everybody could look real quick while we're here and see if that works.
Thank you.
One more. So it's 3.
That's right.
When's A and A meet?
20, I think it's 23rd.
Yeah.
23rd.
Fourth Thursday, so it should be okay.
Okay, I don't want to cross.
Right.
Do you need an earlier start time?
No, I don't, I mean, if we could still do 3:30, or we could do again, we wouldn't need as much time, hopefully, it would just be an update, so.
Just be for that sole
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah,
30th.
I do better on,
30th is Thursday.
It's fine with me.
Good, good.
I'm better on the 28th or 29th. if I could make the 30th work, but I've got to,
How's the 28th look for folks?
Right now, I'm open.
Okay,
The 28th or 29th?
28th, well, either, let's see,
I'm good for Tuesday, the 28th.
okay?
Scratch the 30th, 28th?
Seems like 28, so you don't have to make many changes to the timeline up there, just,
Wow, right now.
just pencil us in.
let's, yeah, so let's say that, we'll say at 3:30 here. And thank you, that's really helpful.
We're gonna go 3 to 5,
Maybe, yeah, 3:30 to 4:30.
3:30.
That's fine.
Hopefully there aren't
Thank-
enough changes that
That warrant that much time.
And we'll know more in
I was
April.
going to say by the
Right.
16th, we'll have a
See
much
where
better
we are on the
sense.
16th, there could be issues, yeah, so we'll have that overflow if we needed that as well, if there are questions, and if we're rolling along pretty well, we may not need it, but I think it's good to have a placeholder there then. Great, great.
You know, now, here's the interesting thing. The reason why I did the 16th was because of all those other dates to just get it on the agenda. You don't have to see it necessarily on the 16th.
I think that,
My sense is you're going to want our feedback
Yeah.
and have the ability to react to that feedback.
Okay, all right, so it's more
Because
than
it's going to
just-
be cold to us. and-
Yeah, it's more than the exogenous variables that will change. It's what you might suggest in the interim.
Right.
Got it, okay.
Because we still haven't seen payroll yet.
Yeah, okay,
Personnel.
good, I
Right.
get it. Fine.
good.
I got one additional
Exogenous.
question.
That's a,
word for me.
one other question, I know that's a 50-cent word, I was thinking, wow.
I'm waiting for a time to use pejorative. I love that word too. I got to use that in an audit exit meeting the other day. The language was pejorative, and I was waiting to see who was racing to their online dictionary.
That's right.
Jesse has a question.
Up to this point, a lot of the data that we've been reviewing deals with cost and revenue. Isn't another significant variable the student population of the students we're going to educate? And that variable, in addition to the other variables, be the driver of the numbers that we report in the projections. So my question is, are we ever going to talk about the student population and the numbers that deal with the student population as part of this process? And that's a question.
That's an excellent question.
Now,
I'm looking in the, and I take that in terms of an enrollment projection. And it makes a difference whether we're going this way or this way or this way. I'm not sure, that's not in my domain, but it's a great question. And there has been some conversation that that task be undertaken. And I don't know if there's anybody here in the room.
Well,
If
and
Maria
so
would
I
like
think
to
if you're saying,
help me on that one?
Can you repeat your question,
Oh,
please?
you're talking about the
Maria,
number of students.
Come on up, come on up.
There's been shifts in the student population between charter schools and the school
There
districts.
we go.
So my question is, shouldn't part of this process that we're involved in and zeroing in on the numbers that are associated with our five-year projections involve a component that deals with the student population?
And where they attend, like the enrollment, and where our students actually live, and how many attend district and how many attend charter schools?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Oh, Maria, come on
Yes.
up, come on up.
So I think if it's the will of the committee to look at something like that, then we certainly can look into that and provide.
So can you repeat what you were saying back there?
Yes. So if you're asking if we can take a look at enrollment patterns, how many students live in the district, how many are attending charters, what that looks like as far as our, how much we lose each year.
Well, no,
Is
no,
that
in
what
terms
you're
of
talking
driving the
about?
cost, in terms of the number of educators, the teachers. I mean,
Teachers,
that's a
okay.
function of enrollment, I would
Okay.
think. So I'm
Yes.
thinking that variable, the student population, is a variable that we need to consider as we look at the trends that are driving the cost. And the revenue.
I was going to say the same thing. We do a activity-based budget based on our average daily census, which drives how many nurses we have, and so that activity, to put it in context, if nothing else, would be really helpful. I agree with you.
And you'll see that on the staffing side. Because there's contractual language we have with CEA that talks about student-to-teacher ratios. So we have those numbers in, those are driving our classroom teacher ratios. Our unified arts teachers, which are, your music, health, PE, those types, as well as, secretarial allocations, those are also a contractual piece, that if your building hits an enrollment of X number, that's how many secretaries you have. So those pieces are there, but it's on the staffing side. And what we've presented so far is primarily departmental piece, so they're servicing all kids as opposed to very specific segments. But in here in the school building side, the $4 million that represents school building non-personnel budgets, there are dollar amounts associated to an elementary kid, middle school kid, high school kid, and then based on actual enrollment in the building, that's gonna generate a building budget. So that piece is in there, but out of the 246 million, that's only 4 million. So that's a small piece of the non-personnel piece, because primarily it's the staff, and that'll be part of the stuff that we talk about when we get to April and May.
So what I'm hearing is, we are using that indirectly
It's built
as
into
we
your-
build the cost.
It's built in.
And-
So,
and
and I
that
think what I'm
disclosure,
hearing
those
here
ratios
is
would be
in
really
the
helpful to
presentation
validate.
on the 16th.
Yes. You'll
The
see
committee
that.
we'd like to see that in relation to the numbers. So if we can understand how how the model that you're using,
Okay.
that is, would that be?
Yep, that's
fair?
Right,
perfect.
and I
It's
don't know
great
specifically,
question, yeah.
but I'm under the impression that initially we were losing kids to charter schools. And now I think that trend is probably somewhat stabilized. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm just suggesting that we consider enrollment as a component of the variable as we consider how valid we are with the cost projections, cost and revenue.
Yes, Board Member
So
Gibbs?
are you asking that as a part of your presentation, you give us an enrollment report and talk about where we've been maybe from a longitudinal state? I think it'd be extremely beneficial. I mean, to look at.
That's what I'm asking. It would help me to know what data would be helpful for you to see as it connects with the budget then. How much money we're allocating to schools in connection with what the enrollment is in the district as opposed to charters. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, yes, all I'm suggesting is that the enrollment component, or the enrollment variable, is something we need to consider as we build the revenue and cost data that goes into the 5-year projection.
What we project to either get back to the district from charters or students.
Just
And
more
what
about.
your staffing is, it
Right.
drives,
Yeah.
how many kids you need to transport, how
Yep.
many kids you need to feed.
So as
So
we're
it-
projecting our expenses, then the census that we're using for that on the building basis and
We can certainly get that
student
for you.
basis.
It's important as we have.
There is a
this
metric that's always been out there. It's called cost per pupil.
Right, which
And
would be
it's off-
great for us to have,
it's-
especially as we
It's often
talk
one
to
that
the
is used to
community.
compare districts. Done at the macro level, it's a nice number, not terribly meaningful. So you have to drill down into that. But in general, to your question, you have to believe that the variable we have here is the number of students, and it does drive. So looking at that relative to,
Contract.
numbers of pupils doesn't necessarily drive my operation and my cost. Numbers of pupils will certainly drive more so, to a greater degree, the educational side. So it is a metric that we should have our hands around.
Board Member Gibbs?
Well, yeah, to that point, when you bring that data, if you could bring a few years trend of the enrollment data and then the cost, the transportation, and cost per pupil would be good, except as the variance with students with IEPs and some of our other services that sometimes skew those numbers, but I think that would be a good base. But to bring those enrollment numbers, but then if you had any projections of where enrollment is projected to go, that would be helpful to me in looking at that number in terms of a financial standpoint, and then looking at where those students went. So there are the number of kids that live in a district that don't attend are not all charter, but if you could tell me how many are Catholic, how many are private, how many are charter, and how many are homeschooled, and then that also, I know you guys use that as a potential reclamation base on where we can go back to get our students or in your retention tool. But that would be interesting to me to look at how that correlates from a numbers standpoint, because it is based on students. They are a number one customer, and everything revolves around us. So, yes, so, yeah.
And I appreciate that. I want to make sure that that is tied to just so we stick to the issue at hand, and we can maybe deep dive in trends. I know the superintendent talked about that at the last meeting. You were kind of redefining or reevaluating census for building use and that sort of
Not
thing.
that part. I'm talking about
Yeah.
projected enrollment in terms of charter. So are we projecting that number is going up? that
Are we
students
losing them or
leaving?
gaining?
Are we losing or are
Yeah.
we gaining students in terms of the budget part? Not the part I'm talking about.
Okay.
How many babies are we born? Not that.
Yeah.
This is directly tied to number of students that are attending school outside the district and looking at where that trend line is going
Okay.
from a fiscal.
Is that,
We can get that information.
okay, yeah, Jody?
I guess my understanding is that even if a child, if we're educating them directly or they're going to a community school, the district is still paying money to transport them and a stipend basically to that charter, right? So we need to know it, but we also, it doesn't necessarily whether those kids are going to a community school or the district school, we still need to budget for their education, right? I mean, when a child goes to a community school, it doesn't cost us any less to educate them, does it? Or you help me understand that.
The cost to us is a reduction in our revenue, and that reduction in revenue is set in the state foundation formula. And so they run the formula, they come up with a number, and there are adjustments made. And among those adjustments are things like the cap, which we're only allowed to grow so much, and then they add in other aid that isn't subject to the cap, and then they take out things like community schools. And that number, and this is one of our issues, is that number is what we call above the line. So what that community school receives for that child from the state, which is taken away from us from the revenue, is before we're restricted. Okay, so
It's not a true suitcase full of money that follows the students.
It's a
Right.
negative income item, it sounds
Yes.
like. But it's still affecting our
It
bottom
does.
line.
oh yeah,
But-
yeah.
But
But we
in a
can't
different way
control
than
that cost.
Your expenses have to go
Because
down.
that's
if
set
you're-
by the state. That deduction is set by the state.
I think the biggest thing for me is, that cost per pupil, you can take all of your costs and take it by the number of kids, and that's, you can break it down by schools and things of that nature. But the more kids you lose, the more money it costs you to run based on the pupils, right? So if I had 1,000 pupils and now I got 900, it costs me more to run it, because my cost didn't necessarily change, but my revenue went down, right? So, I know it's not a direct apples to apples correlation, but it will certainly help us just understand, if that movement towards charter continues to grow, how does that impact us as you trend it out to say, well, I've got 100 less kids on a building or 50 less kids in a building because they went to charter school. Well, my cost to run that school that they were at didn't go down, so how do I adjust from a budgeting standpoint long-term to look at that if that trend you forecast it to continue to, maybe not as fast, but there's still a rate where we think there's going to be students leaving. So that would I think for what everybody said, that would certainly give us at least some constructive tools to make some recommendations.
Okay?
Very good.
Thank you.
Yes.
On
Tim, then we'll-
In your long-range projections, just following on this, is that a key driver that you have in there, which is, here's the number of students, So it's already built in, just like in your budget. Here's the variable expense, here's the fixed expense. That's not how you build your forecast.
It's too macro level.
Kind of a roll forward.
It's
of
too
just
macro level,
numbers.
except for counting, estimating how many kids we might lose to charters.
Okay.
It's not, that's
It's not that
a bit
refined.
too-
It's not
yeah,
that
it's a little-
refined.
That's a bit too granular, quite
Right.
frankly.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think we've got great feedback for the next meeting and the next budget review that we'll work on. And so with that, there are two things. We need to we'll go into our next agenda item. I would like to ask, and Carolyn stepped out, but I would like to, at our next meeting as well, that we should have the results, the state audit results, the financial audit. And I want to make sure we review those quickly as well. And then there are several management letter comments that'll be released, and just so the committee has an overview of that.
From last year.
It'll
Last
be,
year's
yes,
audit. Okay.
last fiscal year audit.
Will you be able to get a draft before the meeting to review?
Yes, well, there should be, the
Actually-
report should be released by then. I
Actually,
think.
you can see the end report. The draft has already been
The audit
reviewed.
committee's reviewed the draft, so we should have the final, but it hasn't been released finally yet. So, Carolyn, I was just talking about the next meeting. I'd like to make sure we have time to go over the state auditor's report and the comments at kind of a high level, so. There's and the management responses to the management letter, so. But to make sure that we're in the loop on that on a timely basis. So with that, I think we'll go to our next agenda item. Board Member Preddy?
Sure. I move for the adoption of a motion that the Finance and Appropriations Committee go into executive section per section 122.22G4 of the revised code to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations or bargaining sessions with the public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
So after this, we will adjourn after executive
Just need
session.
a second though first.
Oh, I need a
Second.
second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, very good. After this, we'll adjourn out of executive session. So, excuse me?
We need to take a roll call.
Oh, okay, and Mr. Treasurer, can you do a roll call vote?
Yes, Mrs. Durant.
Are we in executive session?
Oh, so everybody has to, we have to do an individual
I need
roll
a
call
voice
vote?
count.
That's fine. I was just seeing if we are in or out of executive session.
Oh, you're
Well,
in.
we're not yet.
Either
Ms.
way.
Zoranen,
Yes.
Mr. Hemphill,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs? Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
And Chairman Hudson?
Yes. Okay,
Good. The motion passed, carried.
Okay.
Thank you.